Hello, everybody, and welcome in to Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I am Nick Bate. He is Ricardo Martinez-Paz. We've got an episode coming at you today talking about the Steelers and Eagles. Not a lot going on right now in the world of the Steelers and Eagles, but still enough for us to sit down, break it down, and have some good conversations, have some laughs along the way. So we've got some stuff to talk about. We'll be talking about both of the head coaches of these teams for different reasons a little bit. Got some other news we'll dive into. So it'll be a fun time. But before we do any of that, I ask you, Ricardo, how are you doing today, my friend?
Hey, man, I'm doing well. Just had some Chick-fil-A. I'm stomach filled up too. So I saw you this weekend, which was a great time, man, at our friend's birthday. But yeah, man, how you doing?
Oh, yeah, dude. It's always a blast. That was great seeing you this weekend. I'm doing well, man. You had the Chick-fil-A. I just chomped down this, let's see what this is here. It is a Elevation high protein bar that I just bodied before this episode. So we are both fueled up. Let's go.
Yeah, we are.
No energy shortage in this episode now. Chick-fil-A and Elevation protein bars. That's what Speaking Seagulls is fueled on. Heck yeah, bro. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to not a lot going on. I mean, this is kind of, we're not in that lull of the NFL season yet. That really comes from sort of, well, it's really going to start sort of next week through training camp, but we're not there quite yet. There'll be a period of a couple weeks until teams kind of start up with training camp in late July and whatnot that are pretty slow. But we've still got some stuff to talk about. The Eagles are now done with their mandatory minicamp. The Steelers have today and tomorrow left of their mandatory minicamp, and then we're kind of into that mid-summer break, or I guess early summer break, you could call it. But let's get into it, and let's start talking about these head coaches. And kind of the big piece of news that we have to talk about with Mike Tomlin and the Steelers is that Tomlin got an extended through the 2027 season to remain the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. Kind of puts all those questions to bed about, coming into this offseason. Was he still interested in coaching? Was he looking to potentially take some time off, potentially look to move to another team? All of that goes to bed. Mike Tomlin is the guy in Pittsburgh. He is locked up through 2027, Ricardo. And the big thing this signals to me is that for as long as he wants to be the Steelers head coach, he's going to be the Steelers head coach, which is the way it should be. And you know what? I'm glad that this was all kind of put to bed and there could be no sort of rumblings about this for a while. And I think they even kind of did this extension earlier than some people even thought, but it is now officially done. He's here through 2027.
Yeah, man. I mean, you think about where the Steelers were at one point in this past season. What, they had lost 3 straight. They were 7-7. The rumors, all the noise was really starting to pick up. It was like, maybe this is the time that the Steelers might move on. And then they rattle off 3 wins, make it to the postseason, and it's just like somehow, some way, man, it's always down the stretch. Like Mike Tomlin always knows how to get his guys going, playing their best football. And, even with all the injuries at the quarterback and all the question marks there, they still, somehow it's just, he's so good at really, buy-in, like the culture part of it. It's just like these players, I feel like, regardless of who's playing at what position, it's just these players will continue to fight for him no matter what, no matter the hard times, the happy time. They're really bought into it, and it's, this, to me, this extension is not a surprise, like especially how the way it ended. And they did kind of come back against the Bills in the playoffs, but
Yeah.
They were competitive in that game too. But now, he definitely deserves the extension for sure. It's good to see one of the longest tenured coaches. I think, where is he now on that list? Like current NFL coaches. I'm wondering.
Current NFL coaches with one team.
Yeah, like the longest tenured.
I imagine he has to be number one. I don't know who else would. I don't think there's anybody that's been with their team for as long as he has.
Because Belichick's obviously gone, Pete Carroll's gone. Like,
and he's been here long. He's been in Pittsburgh longer than Andy Reid's been in Kansas City. I'm trying to think who else has kind of been with their team. Sean Payton obviously is with the he was with the Saints for a while, but now that he's with the Broncos, that's obviously not a situation of that. I mean, when you just talk about coaches who have been in the NFL the longest, I mean, he's right up there. There's so many new young coaches that, haven't been in the league for a long time that are also taking prowess. So, I mean, nothing comes to mind of anybody who's been with a team for a longer amount of time or who's been just in the NFL as a head coach for a longer period of time. So yeah, and it's completely the right move. And anybody that questions his coaching prowess, I feel like I talked about this during the season and kind of when these rumors spurred up not long ago, but this guy is one of the best head coaches in the NFL. I think that it's kind of without debate top 5. I think for myself, I'd argue top 3. And it's just the level of consistency, but also the fact that it's like, yes, he gets a lot out of rosters that don't necessarily have, the on-par talent. And I think you saw that last year when they went to Mason Rudolph and they still found their way into the playoffs and found their way in a competitive game against the Buffalo Bills in that wild card round. So I'm happy. He's a great head coach. I don't want there to be anybody else who's the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I hope that he wants to coach even well past 2027. But I'm excited about it, man. And you know me, I'm a big Tomlin supporter, so I am very happy this deal got done. And there's no questions about his kind of long-term future in Pittsburgh or any questions about him taking time off or going to the broadcast booth or anything about that. He's the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to ask you this question.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to kind of cross sports a little bit. To me, maybe I kind of compare Tomlin to Eric Spoelstra with the Miami Heat. To me, it's like even when the teams aren't necessarily the best, they still find a way to make this team successful. I don't know. Is that a good comparison?
I like that comparison a lot, actually. And I think that the level of longevity both guys have had with their teams, you can't really compare coaching styles because obviously it's two sports.
Right.
I mean, I like that comparison. Now, the one thing that makes me kind of pause is I think the thing with Tomlin that you really hang your hat on is, yes, he's always has his teams competitive. And he, obviously no season under 500. He's always going to have them in the conversation for a wild card berth. And obviously years past, it was, the Steelers kind of just ruled the AFC North. The interesting comparison that I'm going to be curious of kind of going forward until the Steelers really find their next franchise long-term quarterback answer is, does he put the fear in other teams the way that Spoelstra puts the fear in other teams in the playoffs? Like when you get to the playoffs as a 1 seed in the NBA, I think the Heat were the 8 seed this year. That was the team you didn't want to play in the first round because even without Jimmy Butler, even with a lesser roster, you just didn't want to have to match up against Eric Spoelstra. I don't know if you get that same feeling if the Steelers get in as a 6 or a 7 seed. I don't know if you can say the Steelers are the team you don't want to match up against. So I don't know if they compare in that sense, but also I think it's just because it's a different sport where, it's there's without a premier quarterback, you're not going to be able to make a run and get through Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson all in the same playoffs. But I do like that comparison a lot.
Yeah, that's fair. I just randomly thought of it. I was like, maybe that could be something, but but it totally deserved going back to the topic. And I think that it's No,
you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, well, now it's really the time to win is now, essentially. I mean, the window. I mean, obviously, this season with all the talent that Omar Khan and the organization, the front office has acquired, you're in a position to make a pretty significant jump. And even with the tough schedule, that's a whole different conversation. I think this is one of the better teams Tomlin has had during his tenure, at least on a talent standpoint.
From a talent standpoint, yeah. I agree with that statement about the talent. Again, it's so much just hinges on the quarterback position, which really hasn't been solved since Big Ben was in Pittsburgh. But again, I don't want to necessarily make this bold proclamation until I at least see training camp and see these guys in pads and see Russell Wilson playing in a preseason game early season. But With the talent on this roster and the way Omar Khan has built it, I think the Steelers are 100% a sleeper team to win the AFC North this year. And I think anybody that thinks that they're going to finish last or this is going to be the first season Mike Tomlin is going to finish under 500, I think is fooling themselves. If Russell Wilson just makes half of the throws that Kenny Pickett missed in his time in Pittsburgh, this team is easily capable of winning 10 games without issue. Now, again, they have a really hard schedule this year, but I absolutely think that this team is a sleeper to win the division and really surprise people.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I think they will make a run for the playoff. I mean, either way, I think even if it's not division, I think they'll push for wild card. But again, it's a way different story from last season. Obviously, they just made it last. I feel like they might push for one of those higher wild cards at the very least. But
yeah,
obviously, it's still early on, and
yeah, and this is a lot. There's a lot that has to get sorted out before we even get to week one, and you never know how these injuries stack up. With other teams and Pittsburgh themselves. There's always stuff like that that's going to crop up. But they also play in one of the hardest divisions in the entire NFL, if not the hardest. But that's going to be a larger conversation for a different day. But again, I definitely see them at this point. I can say I'm confident they are a sleeper to win the division, and I think anybody that thinks this is going to be one of Tomlin's worst seasons as head coach is kidding themselves, and they're going to be wrong. That's how I feel at this point. Of where we're at in the kind of off-season calendar going into next year. So, but I do like that comparison on Spoelstra. I think it makes sense. Interesting crossing sports there. But let's talk about your head coach a little bit with the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni. Nothing pressing, but I guess two things I want to talk about with him is, you choose which one you want to talk about first. But number one, this is the first off-season he's decided to hold mandatory mini camps. And number two is that he's kind of been talking to the media and everything like that. And he said I guess he spends some time down on the Jersey Shore in the summers. And when he sees Giants fans, he kind of gets into it with them a little bit and kind of just chirps back at him, hey, well, we got your best player in Saquon Barkley this offseason. So I don't know which one you want to talk about first, but kind of just interesting things that are going on with the Eagles right now in this portion of the offseason.
Yeah, I'll talk about the second one, more of the interactions with Giants fans sort of. I mean, listen, this isn't surprising to me at all. It's just who he is. Like, obviously, we think about, after they won that Monday Night Football game against the Chiefs, and he starts like yelling at the fans. I forget what exactly he said, but he was just like so fired up about it, and it's just like that's just who he is. That's his personality. That's his style. Like the fact that he's, saying like, rubbing it in like, oh, we got your best player sort of thing. Like, yeah, of course, he would say that. Like he's all for that stuff. And it obviously when it goes wrong, he gets clowned for it, but and then rightfully so. But it doesn't really rub me one way or the other. I'm just like, like you don't have to be saying that either. Like you could just totally avoid that and just keep that to yourself. But like he's not wrong necessarily because that was the Giants. Well, at least one of their best players. I mean, they still have Dexter Lawrence, and I mean that's about it, really. But it's
Andrew Thomas. I think could also be in that discussion. But yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Andrew Thomas is definitely up there. I think he'd probably be number one. So those two players, and then Saquon. But I hope that sort of thing doesn't backfire like it did with the Chiefs game. Because then we just went 1-6 after, or whatever that, or it was like 2-7 after that happened. But I just hope it doesn't backfire and blow up in our face, because that would be pretty bad too. That'd be a horrible look too. But the fact that he's so open about it it's just funny to me.
Yeah, and that's just kind of his personality, like you said. But I think it definitely leads to this kind of next point. And I mean, I listen to a lot of New York sports radio, being a Yankees and Knicks fan, and following the Mets pretty closely, and also following the Rangers and everything like that. Nick Sirianni is probably the least popular coach in the NFL outside of Philadelphia. I mean, I think that's probably the case. Some of the talk on these radio shows is that he has the most punchable face of anybody in the NFL, and he's not a liked guy, Ricardo. I mean, what do you think of that when you hear that about your head coach?
I mean,
Do you recognize why he's so dislikable?
Oh, absolutely, dude. I like. I mean, I was at a point where I was like, "Damn, I want this dude to get fired because he does get annoying at times." But like, and obviously lost the locker room, whatever, that whole collapse. But yeah, I absolutely understand why people hate him. It's just like all the talking he does, but that's just his moxie, like you said. It's just his personality. But like, I, I if you had to make a poll, I don't know. I know there was like a poll for players, and then like they ranked certain things. I don't remember if there was one for like most disliked coach or something like that. But Sirianni's up there. You might put Sean Payton up there potentially with the whole Russell Wilson thing, and I don't even know who else would go up there. Like,
the thing that I'd be interested in is I want to know, like the poll they did in the NBA, like which head coach is the head coach you'd least want to play for, and Tom Thibodeau was number one. I want to know that with the NFL, and I'd be very curious to see where he ranks. I think Mike Tomlin would easily be in the top 3 of coaches players want to play for. But I'd be very, very interested to see where Nick Sirianni, if players like that mindset or if they get rubbed the wrong way by it. Because that's got to be an awful feeling. It's an awful feeling for you as a fan when he does this kind of stuff and it backfires. When you're a player in that locker room and the guy that's supposed to be your leader in the locker room is kind of, going about it that way and has that personality, and then it backfires and he looks like an idiot, like that's got to be a little bit embarrassing for the players themselves, I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, at some point, you're probably like, all right, like let's relax, like chill out a little bit, especially with, I mean, a lot of these players, were on the team that collapsed during, down the stretch last season, so they would probably be fed up with it. I mean, again, they're probably used to it too, but it's just like, let's not forget how things ended, sort of thing, and that to me almost like leads into Jalen Hurts and that relationship a little bit, but. I don't. Should we segue right into that, or do you have like anything else?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting segue because I think almost the person like Jalen Hurts emulates so much of like what you'd expect a head coach to be, where like he's not making headlines for the media, like talking trash or chirping fan bases or saying like, haha, we got revenge on the Chiefs. How do you like me now? Type thing. Like all that is coming from the head coach. And not that the quarterback should be doing that either, but it's like you expect more the head coach to be the one that's not trying to make waves with other fan bases and other teams. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think that this is a perfect segue where why don't you take it from here, the recent comments that you've heard from Jalen Hurts on Sirianni.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say one more thing, just like Big Dom. There's a reason Big Dom's there on the sideline, just to keep him in check, but yeah, no. If he had him everywhere, I'm sure Big Dom would be like, "Yo, relax." Like
recently promoted Big Dom too.
Yeah, I forget his title now, but the fact that he got promoted, I'm like, sick. Like, you know what? I can't like listen. I love Big Dom, even though like that whole incident happened and got kicked out and suspended from the side, whatever. But
real quick on Big Dom. Did you even know who he was before that sideline incident?
I knew who he was, but like I'd never heard of like anything like that happening, obviously. But
because I think just from that incident, like I had no clue who he was before that, and now he's almost like an icon. Like he'll go to big time sporting events. Like I remember watching a UFC event he went to, and they put him on the jumbotron of famous celebrities in attendance. Like that's what's come of this whole this whole interaction he had on the sideline.
Yeah, he's gotten so much. I mean, like much more. Much more of a public figure, I guess now, which is funny. But
I remember watching that UFC event, and he showed up on the broadcast of like they were going through famous people that were there. They went through like famous actors, celebrities. Donald Trump might have been there, and then all of a sudden it flashes to they didn't say Big Dom, they said Dominic DeSandro.
Yeah.
I was like, that name sounds familiar, but like what's going on here? And then the broadcasters were like, in case you don't recognize him, that's Big Dom who got into the altercation with Philadelphia. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's star level has been to the point that he's getting celebrity spots on television broadcasts.
That's so funny that people like know him now for that. It's just, I wonder how he feels about that. But I'd love to like.
I imagine he's gotta love it. I think he's turned into such a star that they had to give him this position that gives him kind of more access to the side. They promoted him to this position, I think, to avoid future altercations or issues because he wasn't supposed to even be on the sideline or involved in the manner he was during that altercation. But
yeah.
It's interesting how his stardom is kind of just taken off.
If there's one person I hope never leaves, I hope it's Big Dom. I hope we keep him around.
More than Jeff Stoutland? More than Jeff Stoutland?
Okay, I know them two. They're the only guys I beg we keep. But those are the only two guys in Philadelphia that matter most. At least for the Eagles, at least. But yeah, going back to the Hurts conversation. Listen, I'll just read the quotes that he said when reporters asked him about Nick Sirianni. So a reporter asked, "What have you noticed about Nick being open-minded to change up the offense like he has? What does that say about him?" And then Hurts says, quote, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to it. Then the reporter follows it up and says, well, what have you seen from him as far as doing that? Then Hurts kind of thinks about it and he's like trying to find the words to say it. Then he goes, I think he's great. He's been great in the messages he's delivering to the team, trying to be very intentional in what he's saying. And then he pauses. He's like, yeah. So I'm just like, it's such a lukewarm answer. It's like he's never
gushing over him.
Yeah, like then that kind of happened towards the end of last season. So I think it was actually after the season ended. And I think a reporter asked him, like, do you think, Nick Sirianni's the guy to lead you guys going forward? And then he kind of like walked around it and didn't really answer it directly. It was kind of similar to the answers I just said before, kind of just lukewarm. And yeah, and I'm just like sitting there. Nick Sirianni, listen, I know he's a passionate guy and all, like Sirianni, but he will always stick up for Jalen Hurts. And it just feels like Hurts, obviously, I mean, it doesn't seem like he'll do the same for him. Like, it's just not reciprocated, which, again, I don't know how I feel about that. And obviously the way things ended last season with the horrible ending and the playoffs, that obviously is still something that sticks is in the back of their minds, I guess, especially Jalen Hurts. But
how do you think Jalen Hurts actually feels about Sirianni?
I see when a quarterback says that about your head coach when it doesn't really even defend him. To me, it's just like I don't think he wants him there. But again, it's also like kind of know your place sort of thing. Like there's no player that's bigger than the head coach. Well, that's what I believe at least. But and the decision was made. It's like, all right, we're going to keep Sirianni. So at that point, I feel like you just accept it and you kind of try and mend the relationship, trying to heal. I don't know. Not that it was like fractured necessarily, but I just think you could at least defend him. Like that's the very least you can do, right? Like, say all these other things, like walking around it and not really answering questions about him. Like it's so strange to me. So it's odd.
Yeah, man, it is weird. And it's the type of thing where, like, look, I get it if Jalen Hurts' personality is a little bit more stoic as a leader and he's not this super kind of outgoing guy with the media, but like it takes a lot of effort for him to really decide what he wants to say when talking about Nick Sirianni. He can never just give a straightforward answer like, yes, I think that Nick Sirianni, he's put a great kind of offensive program for us together, and I like that he's adaptable to, change things that aren't working. Or it's it's not even just football, media talk of kind of praising him. I'm not saying that he has to gush over him the way that Patrick Mahomes gushes over Andy Reid, but just kind of giving your support to him to keep us from talking about it and to keep other members of the media talking about it is really all it would take.
Yeah, like you could say literally what you just said. You don't have to believe it necessarily. Like you can just say that. Like that's fine. And then you won't have all the people like us, reacting to it and being like, all right, maybe he doesn't support it. Like then you won't have all the questions. And it's just, I don't know, man. I feel like I've just had the feeling where it's just like, I don't know, this might be beyond repair, this relationship. And
interesting.
I feel like they might just not be on the same page. And clearly they weren't during the season when they struggled. But,
honestly, maybe Jalen Hurts doesn't like how different their personalities are. Maybe he wants somebody that's a little bit more of this mature personality leader in the locker room, not this guy that's getting into it with fans while he's on vacation in the Jersey Shore, not this guy screaming at Chiefs fans after a victory, not this guy that's, making headlines and kind of antagonizing other fan bases and other teams. Like, I'm not saying that Jalen Hurts wants somebody who's exactly like him, but just somebody who's maybe got, and I feel bad saying this, but maybe somebody who's got a little bit more of an adult personality, head on their shoulders to kind of lead men and doesn't leave their emotions so much on their sleeve like Nick Sirianni does.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not telling Nick Sirianni to change, but if you think that relationship may be fractured beyond repair, maybe it just does rub Jalen Hurts the wrong way a little bit.
Yeah, because you think about the Super Bowl run. Like, obviously, Sirianni's never changed. That's always how he's been. But at least then you could tell there was a buy-in with the team on that run. And then last season, it just, once it all fell apart, it really fell apart, and it was just like, I think all the blemishes came out, and it's hard. It's really hard to get over the negative stuff. Like, that's something that just stands out. It sticks out like a sore thumb, man. It's something you dwell on. And Jalen Hurts, obviously, being the competitor he is, the player he is, the guy who drives himself like crazy. I mean, he's just like very strictly business kind of guy, like you said. It's just he wants to do better, and I feel like he wants to win, obviously. And I feel like, not to say that he doesn't think Sirianni's going to get him there, but almost like maybe that's how he feels. Where it's just like, I don't know if he's the guy that'll get us there again, like back to the Super Bowl. I don't know, because it went wrong, man. Like it just all fell apart. But I don't know. It would make sense if Hurts were to want someone a bit more like mellow and just like, strictly business guy. Yeah. But again, that's that's out of his control. That's not his responsibility.
So I have a question for you now. Obviously, I think with the way that things ended last year, and obviously there was speculation last season after the collapse of if Sirianni was going to come back or not. I think his seat is hot, but how hot do you believe Nick Sirianni is on the hot seat of NFL coaches? I'll just kind of leave it at that. How hot do you think his seat is?
I'd say it's hot. And I guess I'll bring up the point of like where he said, I'm not going to be like in control of the offense, I guess, sort of thing. Like he's leaving that to Kellen Moore. Again, that brings me back to what's his role really at this point. If he's just overseeing stuff, then fine. But I would say it's hot, and this is just one of the many things I'm worried about for this season. The head coaching part of it. And if things don't start off well, like the Eagles have an easy, I guess it's easier than the rest of their schedule, at least. Start to their season. Like they're winnable games that they have in the first 4 or 5. Like they should have no more than one loss. Like if they start off, if they start off like winless, then he's definitely gone. But if it's something like even 2 and 3, or 3 and 2 would be fine. I think then the questions will, and then the seat will really start heating up. But I wouldn't say it's like hot, like steaming hot. I think it's just hot.
Yeah, man, it's such a crucial season for Nick Sirianni and really just this Eagles team to have success, because it's like and again, I don't want to get too deep into speculation here, but if Nick Sirianni, if this team struggles and Nick Sirianni, like you said, isn't involved in any particular part of this, this team's offensive game planning, it could be really challenging to, all of a sudden then potentially look to move on from him after the season if it's a failure. If the season is a failure and the Eagles deem he's not the guy. And then you look to potentially bring in a new head coach and potentially another offensive coordinator in another scheme. And then you're talking about Jalen Hurts in this offense going from Shane Steichen to Brian Johnson to Kellen Moore this year. That's potentially 4 different schemes in 4 years if you were to have to move on to another head coach that either wants to implement his own offensive scheme or bring in his own offensive coordinator. There's a lot that hinges on the Eagles and Nick Sirianni having success this year.
Yeah, that's what scares me. I'm like, yeah, if it doesn't work out, then it's not going to look pretty at the end of it. So,
No,
well,
no,
I'm
it will
trying to
not.
be optimistic about it, but
Yeah.
it's yeah, a
So
lot of
last thing I just want to touch on with Nick Sirianni. Maybe this isn't really that big a deal, but the first time he's ever held mandatory mini camp in his time as Eagles head coach. What do you make of that?
I mean, good change. You got to make change, especially after how things ended. Like I said, and I mean, the first few seasons he's been there, he obviously hasn't held them, but and he's been a bit more. He's been one of the lighter. Well, let me rephrase. And when it came to practices, there wouldn't be as many pads on.
Yep.
We've touched on that multiple times. So
Yeah. He
maybe
was always
that.
very cognizant of trying to avoid as much soft tissue
Yeah,
injury as possible. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So maybe that also changes in when training camp comes up in preseason. We'll see about that, but I think that's a good step at least. I think that just shows he wants to do better than last year.
Yeah, and maybe it's just he feels some of that pressure too of like, hey, we got to really lock in here on doing everything we can. But
Yeah,
again, it's hard to really make a big idea of it. I think you kind of just said it best off the top. It's good. It's change. It's realizing what we did last year wasn't good enough. So we're going to do
yeah,
things a little bit differently. And one of that was mandatory mini camp. And now we'll look to see if we see the Eagles in more pads during training camp and if they kind of have a more rigorous training camp practice regime and stuff like that. So, if contact is a little more frequent than it's been in the past. But
yeah,
yeah, I think you summed it up best there. So let's keep things moving along and let's stay with the theme of OTAs and mandatory mini camps. Like we just mentioned, the Eagles concluded their first mandatory mini camp under Sirianni last week. The Steelers have a mini camp practice today and tomorrow before they wrap things up. So let's just kind of jump into and we can flip back over to the Steelers first, but 2 to 3 takeaways you kind of had from Eagles mini camp OTAs and 2 to 3 takeaways I've kind of had from Steelers mini camp and OTAs. And I'll kind of start this one out. I think the first big takeaway, I mean, this is where everybody in Pittsburgh has kind of had their eyes since Ben Roethlisberger retired, is the quarterback position. And for what it's worth, I mean, again, there's it's practice in shorts. There's no pants. It's a mini camp. It's OTAs. But Russell Wilson has looked really good so far. And he even kind of came out and said he feels like he's found the fountain of youth in Pittsburgh, which you love to hear. And I think the biggest thing is, you want to hear the things like that he's feeling like he's back to what he was in Seattle. And like you still see the zip on his fastball. He's still making deep throws and he's looked good. I mean, these are things you have to wait until you really start getting pressure on him and there's guys trying to get after him and the pads are on and everything like that to see how it really all shakes out. But it'd be a lot more concerning if the news coming out of it was, well, it doesn't look like Russell Wilson's quite has the same velocity on his velocity on his deep throws. Maybe lost a step on his fastball, but it seems like so far so good with Russell Wilson there as QB1. So I mean, that's definitely what you want to hear.
yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is the guy who's probably going to be starting. You would hope is starting, and you're not paying him very much, but besides the point, it's someone who's been in the league for a lot of years, and it is refreshing to hear that he feels like rejuvenated, almost like he's just the fountain of youth, like you said. So, and then that also sort of rubs off on players too. So that sort of energy, I think, is what the players need. I mean, any team would want, especially from the biggest position on a football team, which is quarterback. So,
yeah, and I think that kind of lends itself to my next point is that the players seem to be buying into Arthur Smith's system and really liking it. And you've heard a lot of guys say like it just puts guys in positions to succeed, which it's kind of what else would you hear? Like, obviously, they're not going to say that they, hate the system. They don't see it benefiting them at all. But it's like, I think that Arthur Smith's system is just the kind of system that we've seen in the past. Like, it can lead to a lot of success for a quarterback, and it doesn't ask the quarterback to do too much. And it really puts the quarterback in a good position. Ryan Tannehill's best seasons came with Arthur Smith as his offensive coordinator. So I really like the fact that this is kind of what a lot of players are saying. And specifically, I think you hear the tight ends kind of raving about the fact of it puts them in positions to make plays. And Pat Freiermuth, I think, is kind of a dynamite tight end that we have yet to really see unlocked, whether it's been due to the system he's in or injuries he's dealt with throughout his career or the play at his quarterback position. But we're already hearing that him and Russell Wilson have a connection. I believe they worked out together even before OTAs. So it seems like there's a lot of good stuff that's just coming out of Pittsburgh. All the question marks of, does Russell Wilson still have, his ability that he once demonstrated in Seattle? What's his leadership style? Everybody seems to really be buying into Russell Wilson's leadership style. How are the players going to react to Arthur Smith's system? Well, so far, so good. We seem to be hearing a lot of good stuff coming out of it. So it's just a lot of positives right now. And that's really what you want to hear. And I mean, so far, so good. And I'm excited to kind of see this thing continue to build because, I think that a lot of stuff is coming together for Pittsburgh. They still maybe need a wide receiver too. But outside of that, I mean, I think there's just a lot of good with the offense.
Yeah, that's just it seems like vibes all around for now, which hopefully they kind of maintain that, sustain that, kind of keep that going and keep riding that throughout the summer, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ricardo, what are any takeaways you have from OTs or Eagles minicamp?
I'm gonna switch to a more negative side. Actually, I'm gonna go. I actually have two negatives, but I'll stick with the first one. So I just think, at least from a defensive standpoint, it just seems like time is running out for certain players. I mean, Nakobe Dean specifically, James Bradbury, who I still at this point don't know why he's on the team, but we talked about this. I think we were texting about it that the Eagles are trying him out at safety, James Bradbury, I should say, at safety, which, first off, he's never played safety in the NFL. I don't think at any point in his career. And to play him there now is kind of, I mean, he might be a depth piece at this point, but again, you're paying him what, $13 million to just be kind of on the bench and maybe a rotational safety. You could probably use that money somewhere else, get someone like Justin Simmons. I don't know, like that. You could probably that's where the money could be better off, I guess. Someone who actually played safety. But that to me, it just seems like it's gonna happen sooner or later. I think he's gone. And he's really just there filling in for Sidney Brown, who's obviously coming off the torn ACL. And I just to me, it's almost like he's a camp body, which is something I've kind of accepted at this point. I've been saying, like, after June 1st, I think he'll be gone, but it's June 12th and whatever. There's no net rush necessarily to get rid of him. And I think the Eagles are just holding on to try and get someone to trade and give him something in return. But I don't think any team is going to be dumb enough to do that, because obviously he completely fell off a cliff last year in terms of play. Was awful down the stretch. So there's I think he's going to get cut eventually, is I guess the point of it, because the corners, it's so much deeper now. But I'll get to that later. But he's one of those guys that I think is going to be, I don't know, out the door soon.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you've seen at points in the NFL guys make the transition from corner to safety, but it's like, it doesn't really make that much sense for the Eagles to do this when I think I agree with you 100%. Like, why not just bring in someone for cheaper using that money, like a Justin Simmons, who's actually has full-on experience playing safety? It just, it feels, I like that comparison use. It feels almost like he's a camp body. Like, you're just waiting to see if you can get something for him before you ultimately decide to cut him, or a team is willing to give you some really small asset for him.
Yeah, and then let's not forget Justin Simmons also played with Vic Fangio. So I actually haven't heard anything about Fangio himself in terms of defensive scheme or anything yet. But I guess it kind of applies to Nakobe Dean. The one thing I will say is I feel bad for Dean, but I also don't. Like, I really wanted him to be successful. I'm really losing hope on him, because the Eagles brought in Zach Bond, they brought in Devin White. Those two guys are playing over him on the first team reps, or at least so far they have been in spring and OTAs and mini camps. So that just doesn't bode well at all for for I'm blanking right now. Sorry, Nakobe Dean.
Yeah.
So, it's just the injuries have obviously caught up to him and they've really plagued him, but he's not injured now. And even then, he's still mostly playing with the second team, taking all those reps. So I'm not going to say he's going to get cut either, but I'm not going to say it's guaranteed he's going to be on the roster when it's all said and done either. But I will say, I think he stays strictly for the fact that Howie Roseman really, and the front office loved him coming out of college. But again, it's been like 3 years. So,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's tough because I remember when he was drafted and we kind of analyzed that draft class. We spent a lot of time talking about Nakobe Dean and the upside he had. And he seemed like such a high character guy. But I mean, I don't know if the injuries have slowed him down. It's definitely kept him from being on the field. And it's like, it's kind of a matter of time. An analogy that Chris Sims uses a lot when I follow him and just kind of his discussions on players, and he really focuses on quarterbacks a lot. But he has a saying where he says, like, it's kind of at the point with a guy like Nakobe Dean, he's either got to shit or get off the pot. It's one or the other at this point. Like, the Eagles aren't going to sit there and wait around forever on him to think he's going to, turn into this player. Like, it's kind of getting to a point of like now or never, man.
Yeah, it really is at that point. So those two players specifically, I feel like they just have been definitely stock downs. I know we're not doing that, but like they just have not. And the other thing with Nakobe Dean, he has never stood out in any off-season training. Like he's never like anytime I read something, his name never comes up in terms of like, oh, he makes a good play, or I guess even on a bad play, he's not. So he's just like so on, like just no one talks about him because he doesn't stand out one way or the other. So I don't know how people take that. Yeah, it's just like I don't know. In training camps and preseason, never stands out one way or the other. So it's just like he's just there. He kind of just exists. Which again, you could take that either way, I guess. But it's just not a great look for him. And again, I wouldn't be shocked if he's gone, but again, the Eagles do have depth.
We're making a lot of analogies to other sports today. I'm gonna have another one for that. Like it's like a type of guy. It's like if you're on a hockey roster, it's like you don't always need to be a guy that's scoring goals and getting points and being great on the power play or penalty kill. Like if you can do things like just draw penalties and hold the puck in the offensive zone, like it's stuff that's not going to necessarily show up on the stat sheet and you're going to write home about, but it's like at least you're making an impact. And it's like, you don't even see that from Nakobe Dean. He's just kind of out there,
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy. Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself there. So, yeah, I just hate it. His time's really running out.
But. Yeah. Well, any other takeaways from OTAs you have before we move on to kind of our last topic of the day?
I'll actually just go back to I'll flip to the positive.
Okay.
I will say, even though those two guys on defense have been struggling, the corner room outside of Bradbury has been amazing. They've been doing really well. Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell, Isaiah Rodgers, who I never even mentioned in our episodes. Obviously was suspended last year for the gambling incidents with the Colts, and the Eagles, thought, let's sign him. Obviously, he's not going to play this season, and maybe he gets reinstated, which he did, and we'll see what he has. Like still, after a year off, I guess. So he's been looking good too. So the fact that the younger guys, obviously Darius Slay is Darius Slay. So the younger guys are making plays, and a couple of them had pick sixes too against Hurts, which Zach Bond deflected one of those. So that's great to hear that the corner room specifically is making plays and really standing out. And you literally use your first two draft picks on DeJean and Quinion Mitchell. So that's great news, and at least it's paying off, early on. But again, that'll be the position I'm looking, or I guess most interested in going into, training camp and preseason.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I also heard that Keely Ringo has kind of made some strides.
Oh, yeah, that's the other player I was going to mention. Yeah. I knew I was forgetting one. Yeah, Ringo's also made a lot of plays. So
yeah. Happy to hear. I've always been a fan of him since the Eagles drafted him as well. So I mean, that's having you want to hear those positives when you've put a lot of investments into that position group in the past 2-3 years with draft picks specifically. So definitely good to hear, and at least some positivity on the defense to go along with the stock down players in James Bradbury and Nakobe Dean. So we will monitor to see how these guys do kind of once we get to training camp as well. But Eagles mini camp wrapped up, Steelers coming to an end soon. The last topic I really just kind of want to touch on too is the Steelers re-signing, or I should say bringing back Cameron Sutton after he was cut by the Detroit Lions. The Office of the State Attorney elected to file a single misdemeanor on Sutton, which for the charges of strangulation of his significant other, which I believe was a felony charge originally, but it was lowered to a single misdemeanor. And I guess the Steelers felt comfortable enough with the situation to bring him back. He still could face discipline from the NFL. So something that we still have to keep an eye on there. But before I even get into anything else of on the field, I just want to say about that, like, his name was circulating after the Steelers didn't really draft a cornerback this offseason of a guy that they could potentially bring back once he was cut. Like, the Steelers are known, obviously, for having a great culture and arguably the best owner in professional sports in the Rooney family. They wouldn't have made this move without Art Rooney's signing off on it.
Yep.
It's just like, it's a weird guy to now have to root for. And I was a Sutton fan back a few years ago when he was with the team. Yep. I said, his season when he was a free agent, he was the most important player for Pittsburgh to bring back.
Yep.
But it's like, it's just weird knowing the situation and how bad it sounds. And him and his partner are still together. But, I guess it even says something about the bigger scope of the NFL, where it's like all these teams will just, bring in players if they think they have any semblance of talent, no matter what awful stuff they've done. So, look, like, I'm a believer in second chances. And again, there's still a ways that this whole thing kind of has to go to develop with the league and everything like that. But man, it sounds like an ugly situation. And I mean, maybe the Steelers know more than I do, but the fact that they're comfortable with it, I guess that says something about kind of what they know about what went on.
Yeah, I mean, you outlined exactly every single point I was going to make about that. Just the fact that, it's not a great look, and it's obviously those actions are, you can't defend those. But from what it seems like, they probably believe that this was a one-off incident, I guess, because I don't think there's been any other track record of that.
No, this was it. And the only thing he's really said when asked about it is, it's an ongoing thing. He can't really comment on it, and he prefers to keep it between him and his family.
Right. So
I think he actually said he considers it a family matter, or they're considering it a family matter that they're trying to resolve. But I believe him and I don't know if it's his wife or his girlfriend, but I believe they're still together. So I don't know. It's just a weird situation. I mean, we'll keep it going with other sports analogies, but it's like the Yankees. I'm a Yankees fan, and they had Domingo Germán on their roster for a while. Yeah. Someone that was accused of, sexual assault and faced punishment for it. And, him and his wife ended up getting married and staying together. He's dealing with some other issues, and I don't even know if he's on an MLB team right now, but it's like, you want to give guys second chances, but this is like a really hard thing to root for this player. And I'm kind of going with the mindset of, it's like, look, the Rooney family knows more than me about this situation. The Steelers organization knows more than me about this situation. They're going to decide what's best about keeping him around, and the league's going to do their thing with deciding on discipline. In the meantime, I'm not really banking on him being a significant part of this roster. But, if he gets cut or the league faces, puts discipline down on him, so be it. He's gone. If everything ends up kind of getting cleared and he's able to play for this team, then all right. I mean, I guess he's going to be, a part of this roster here going into this season. But until more of that gets worked out, it's a tough player to root for. And I'm not going to really feel bad if the Steelers decide to, down the road cut him, or the league disciplines him.
Yeah, I mean the Lions cut him because of this incident. I mean, he was in the first year of his first year of his the 3 year, or it might have been going into the second year, I should say,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
his
going into the second
3 year,
year,
$33
3.
million contract that he got. But yeah, it's one of those situations where it's like, yeah, it's very touchy subject. But I mean, in terms of football, it's kind of hard to get to that point when we don't know, when there's so many question marks and uncertainties about this whole incident.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, like you said, if things clear up, if he like works out and he makes the team, then fair enough. But again, I mean, I'll say this, like, at least he gives you depth for now. Like he's a camp
yeah.
buddy kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
well, I'll also say, I mean, it's like there's probably no organization in the NFL that knows Sutton better than the Steelers, even more so than the
yeah,
Lions. Um,
exactly.
so it's like Tomlin definitely has a relationship with him, and they wouldn't have done this deal if they didn't kind of need cornerback depth. And I said it before, when he was on the Steelers, he was a great player. He played almost all the snaps every game for this team. I
Yep.
thought he was arguably the most important player to the defense outside of TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick, back when he was still, kind of in his prime on the Steelers. And, they're going to bring him in to kind of compete for the slot cornerback role. Now, I'll kind of say, like, is it worth it to the point? Did they see him as that significant an upgrade over bringing back Patrick Peterson, who's got
Right.
more of a veteran presence, who's been an all-pro in this league, who has a good relationship with Joey Porter Jr., who brings a veteran presence to the locker room, is a high character guy? Like, I don't know. Maybe the Steelers see him as that significantly better. That I can't answer. That's up to the Steelers to decide. That's where I kind of question it. Last year he struggled. He allowed 889 yards against him, 5 touchdowns, and quarterbacks had a 113.9 passer rating when targeting him, which is bad. Point blank,
Yeah.
it's bad.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of question. It's like, all right, maybe you want to add to the cornerback room. Is this guy even that same good player you had 2 years ago in Pittsburgh? Like, would you have just been better off bringing back Patrick Peterson? Because I've been on the Patrick Peterson train for a while now.
Yeah.
And I think that this definitely kind of minimizes. I don't want to say it squashes it fully, but I think that this definitely limits it down to like a less than 5% chance Patrick Peterson is back on this team next year.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. Like you said, he could get cut, and then you bring Peterson in. I don't know. I mean, it's not like Peterson's gonna. I mean, he's even said he's like he loves Pittsburgh too. So
Yeah.
and I don't know. That's I guess a different conversation, but anything can happen. I guess on that front, those two fronts. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll monitor it and see kind of how things move going forward and when the league ultimately makes a decision on him and just see how far this kind of goes and what comes of it. So we'll definitely keep an eye on it. My only other thought with the Steelers is just to kind of give an update on Cam Hayward. Nothing major, but he did kind of show up to OTAs and he's been present. And it seems that he's kind of going to go in the direction that TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and Minka Fitzpatrick all went with their contract negotiations of doing a hold in. So he's going to be present, but he's not going to participate in drills or anything like that. But I mean, I'm not surprised that's the leadership guy he is, the high character guy he is, that he's going to be there and be, around it. And he recognizes how important a season this is for Pittsburgh and how kind of really important he is to the defense and the defensive front too. So he's present at OTA and mini camps, but yeah, not participating in drills or anything like that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's good that he's showing up, especially because the younger guys, the likes of Keanu Benton and others, can learn, still learn from him, and having him there, it's just one of your biggest leaders, maybe the biggest leader there in Pittsburgh. Having him there is, I mean, I don't know, kind of similar to the Russell Wilson thing, like gives more positive vibes, and it's also refreshing to see, Cam Hayward saying like, yeah, I want to be a one helmet guy, like
Absolutely.
he obviously wants to retire a Pittsburgh Steeler, which I'm glad, not that it was really a doubt, but it's just like to hear those words. It's almost like, yeah, like I'm like just happy to hear. I'm not even a Steelers fan. I just like I wanted to retire a Steeler, but just his presence there alone, it's just, I mean, he's such a beloved person, even outside of Pittsburgh. Like, just the amount of respect I have for him, and just everything about him, really on off the field. Just I like truly respect him, and I'm glad he's just there and not holding out, because we've also seen in the past that sometimes those don't work out, and
yeah.
But it just general, yeah, just overall, I'm glad that he's there at least, and still, like, I hope they can work something out. They find a middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason that a deal shouldn't get done. This guy's a future Steelers Ring of Honor guy. It's like, get this done. You saw in the past, like, they kind of forced Troy Polamalu into retirement earlier than he wanted to because he was on the back end of his career a little bit, and it ended ugly. It didn't look good. I mean, since then things have kind of been rectified, but like, learn from the past mistakes of this franchise. I know Omar Khan wasn't involved in that decision, but it's like, find a way to get the deal done. You can get creative and do it, and I'm confident that they'll find a way to make sure that Cameron Hayward stays a one helmet guy. And hopefully both sides are happy about the way that that's done. So just a little update, and we'll continue to follow it, and hopefully something does eventually get done. But Ricardo, any final thoughts from you before we wrap this up here?
Nah, man. Hey, you start your job Monday, so I'm wish you the best of luck in that, man.
Hey, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, Monday, looking forward to it. Moving down and in with my aunt and uncle today to kind of just get acclimated down there before I start Monday. So I appreciate that, bro. And yeah, sounds good. Until then, we'll keep our eyes out for anything Steelers and Eagles related, man. Always a blast talking with you. We will see everybody next time. Peace out.